and I've been following along. First, we did a little talk about um, the benefits of resistance training, why you should be thinking about resistance training and including it in your exercise routine. And this last week we talked about the squat, and now this week we're going to talk about the deadlift. So the deadlift is probably my favorite movement pattern. And I think a lot of people hear the term deadlift and they think about a traditional deadlift with a barbell and someone picking it up off the floor. And yes, that is a deadlift exercise, but the deadlift is also what we consider a movement pattern, because it is a movement that we do probably knowingly or unknowingly throughout the day in our daily lives. So anytime you pick something off the floor, you're really deadlifting something off the floor. So that could be a child, a golf bag, could be groceries, it could be a suitcase, it could be a sandbag, it could be a barbell, it could be a kettlebell, it could be a bag of groceries, your luggage, something like that, right? So we see this movement pattern not only show up within the gym setting, but we also in a sports setting, but also within our daily lives. So it's a very important movement pattern, because unless gravity somehow disappears, it's going to be in our lives for a long time. Because we also always need to pick things up off the floor. So it's a very important movement pattern. And the key to deadlifting things, and we don't always do this in everyday life, but in the gym, for safety reasons and proper form, the key to deadlifting is a hinge pattern. So you're probably wondering why I'm standing at this weird angle in front of my refrigerator in my basement / gym. It's because I want to use it as a cue for us when mastering the hinge pattern. Because if you're going to deadlift in the gym, you need to want to make sure you get this pattern, this hinge pattern down. It's really hinging, which is raising and lowering the weight from the ground. It's not bending down and picking it up like you would in a squat, but you're hinging at your hips to do that. So what do I mean by hinging at your hips? Well, basically it means, because I'm going to turn sideways here so you can see, is you're going to push your hips back, right? And so you can see as I push my hips back, the upper part of my body comes down forward, right? And that's bringing me closer to whatever I'm trying to pick up. So you want to think about the cue that is probably most helpful is thinking about your butt touching the thing behind you. So a good way to actually do this, not only think about it, because some people even struggle with thinking about it, like myself, but the good way to do this is to actually stand with a wall behind you. In this case, I have my refrigerator behind me that I'm going to use. So if I hinge back far enough, I can feel my butt touching the refrigerator. You can actually see that happening, right? And you want to be a distance away from the object behind you, so that when you get to the point where your butt actually touches the thing behind you, that you feel a stretch from your butt down to maybe in your kneecaps, right? So right along your hamstring, that's where you want to feel a stretch. And that's how you know you're doing a good hinge pattern, right? So if I put this kettlebell in front of me, again, I hinge back like this, my butt touches the thing, and now I can actually reach this kettlebell, right? And if I shoot my hips forward, I can raise the kettlebell, right? Shoot the hips back, butt touches the fridge, feel the stretch in my hamstrings, raise the kettlebell. And that is what we would call a deadlift. Now that's a very specific form of a deadlift called an RDL. So it's called a Romanian deadlift, right? And that's one of the basic deadlift patterns I like to start people off with, especially if they're not familiar with that hinge pattern, right? So I get them to set up with something behind them. I get the weight. It could be a barbell, it could be a dumbbell, it could be a kettlebell, it could be whatever you want, right? Whatever you want to use. I just happen to have a dumbbell here. And I have them use the cue, shooting their butt back, touching the thing behind them, and then just moving their hips forward to stand up. And then moving the hips back, touch behind them, feel the stretch, stand up. keeping your back straight the whole time. You don't want to round, right? You're not rounding our backs to try and get our hands to the weight. We're keeping our back straight and using our hips to push back and get down to the weight to lift it up. Okay, and that's basically it. So give that out. So you're gonna try it out. Like I said, you can use a kettlebell, use a barbell. It would look very similar, just two hands on a barbell. A dumbbell will be a little bit harder to do, but a kettlebell with two hands on the kettlebell works really well. And that works really well. The other movement I like to do too, this is a little bit more challenging, but sometimes it's a little bit easier for people. It's called a heel to wall RDL. And here, you're gonna put your heel up against the wall and you shoot the hips back to touch, right? Lowering the kettlebell. And this really kind of is a little bit more challenging from a balance perspective, but sometimes I find that people can do that pretty well, and maybe not so well with the RDL, but that's another thing to try as well. And once you start to get really advanced, I'm gonna move this over here. My favorite actually deadlift is to use a trap bar. So this is what's called a trap bar. It's a little bit different than a kettlebell, or a kettlebell obviously, a straight bar. Here the handles are on the side of the barbell and the weight is in the center of the barbell. So one of the struggles that people have with traditional barbell deadlift is their back, right? The weight is out in front of them. It's really tough on their back. This has a lot of advantages to it, because the weight is now centered in mass, so it's right next to your legs. Your hands are also in this more, I guess, a neutral grip here. And also, we have these, I don't know if you can see from that camera angle, but there's high handles and low handles on this specific trap bar. So if you're taller like I am, it's harder to, get all the way down to pick up traditional barbell, but the handles higher up, you have a higher pick point. Again, a little bit easier for taller people to deadlift. And this is my favorite way to deadlift. It feels the best for me. I really don't use a traditional barbell to deadlift at all, but this is one of my favorite things to use, equipment to have. It's probably one of the most recommended pieces of equipment I would personally purchase, and I obviously did. But if your gym has one, you can try that out as well. It's one of my favorite ways to deadlift as well. It's still the basic, it works basically the same as what I just showed you, the RDL, except you're gonna hinge and you're gonna pick up the weight, with the handles instead of the weight being in front of you with the RDL. And probably don't want to use the fridge behind you when you're using something like a trap bar. If you're working up to using a trap bar, you're probably at a point where you got that hinge pattern down. Start light, obviously, and work your way up from there. But that would be kind of the more advanced way of deadlifting, and including that deadlift. And then, like I said, picking up anything from the ground at that point, whether it's a suitcase or groceries or golf bag or a kid or whatever, should be very easy. So I hope that's helpful. Please let me know if you have any questions or comments. I hope it was useful. As always, you can get all this content and stay up to date with the next movement pattern that I talk about in the series by signing up for my newsletter. If you go to rjbhealth.coach, click the newsletter link at the top, and you can sign up for the newsletter, and I'll email you all the videos when they're released. As always, if you're also interested in one-on-one coaching and really deep diving into resistance training and all other aspects of health, you can go to my website, again, rjbhealth.coach. Right on the homepage, click the schedule discovery call button, fill out the form, and I'll get back to you and we can talk more about that. And that's it for this week, and